The Chicago Bulls have an aging roster. They're not that good, and they have a lot of players that other teams might be interested in this season. So we're going to talk about the Chicago Bulls in an everything must go fire sale type of video. Now I know this timing isn't the best. They just beat the Utah Jazz by 17 points. Listen, the Utah Jazz aren't that good either. They had their fire sale a little bit last year, traded off a lot of pieces, whether that was Gobert, Mitchell, then they made another trade at the deadline with the Lakers. They've made a lot of trades. The Bulls, I think, are destined to make a lot of trades here coming up. So welcome everyone to Utility Sports. Hopefully you guys are excited for this video. If you are, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. And without further ado, let's jump into it here with our video preview. The Chicago Bulls are bad. Just like I started the video off, we know that the Bulls are not that good. Currently, they are 3-5. They are 12th in the Eastern Conference currently. Before the year, I looked at them as one of the worst teams in the East, and a lot of people kind of gave me pushback on that, saying, oh, they'll be better than some of these young teams. I don't think enough people accounted for some of the young teams taking a couple steps forward. The Bulls likely taking a step backward because of age regression. Their players are all on the wrong side of 30 for the most part. That's not where you want to be as a franchise, especially when you're not a great team or a really, really good team. The Bulls are a bad team. They have guys who we would consider likely trade assets. Now, there are some issues. The direction of the organization is a little confusing right now. They extended Nikola Vucevic this offseason. Why? I don't know. Probably because they traded too much to get him in the first place. The whole thing's a little backward, and I think this video is going to double down as not only what could the Bulls trade, what could they get for who they trade away, but will they actually do that? Will they choose a direction that is different than their current pathway, which is one to failure? And I think that they need to, because in order to open up avenues for future winning, they need to make some changes, and they need to make some drastic ones quickly, because if they wait too long, the value that they do have will diminish and they will be in serious trouble long term. So let's get into it with the most important topic here, and that is self-realization. The Chicago Bulls don't have it. Arturas Karnisovas, kind of new to the job, right? Was working under Tim Connolly in Denver for quite some time, and then now really getting his first chance to really run a team. He's running the Chicago Bulls. Since then, he's made a lot of moves. He traded for Nikola Vucevic. That most famously is the trade that kind of destined this entire thing for failure. They gave up way too much for Vucevic. I was recording a video when it happened, and I said, look, that's a terrible trade for Chicago. I don't think that was rocket science back then. I think most people understood the Bulls gave up way too much for a guy who consistently led the Magic to maybe an 8th seed, sometimes a 7th seed. It was just an unbelievable package that they gave up for him. And then they kind of doubled down on it in the offseason, going out and getting DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball. I can't say I hate either of those moves in a vacuum. In fact, I would say relatively they are solid moves. But given their entire organizational structure at that point, trading for Vucevic, already having assets out the door, doubling down on that, sending more assets out the door, the Bulls have found themselves kind of left out to dry because they haven't had enough assets coming in while their team has been relatively okay, which means that they aren't adding any more talent to a team that wasn't good enough to win a playoff series in the first place, which I think was everyone's concern as soon as they made the trade for Nikola Vucevic, which brings us here to their first trade asset to talk about, and it is DeMar DeRozan, who they traded for with San Antonio. Now, I think a really important thing to talk about with Chicago, they have a lot of access to their own picks. Now, the access that they don't have starts in 2025. They owe the Spurs what is a top 10 protected first round selection. That pick has backups into 26 and 27, and those backup protections are top 8. So if the Bulls are really, really bad the next 4 years, they will keep their picks. If the Bulls are relatively bad, like 12th pick in the draft bad, well, they'll lose their pick. And that is kind of tricky when your team isn't that good and you need to continue infusing more young talent into your roster. So you really are faced with two pathways here. Try to be competitive and lose a pick that kind of hurts to lose, or bottom out and guarantee yourself the ability to retain your pick the next 2, 3, 4 drafts. And I think that's the way that they should go because they're already not good. Trade asset number one is DeMar DeRozan. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. He's 34 years old. This is the exact type of player I'm talking about where he's on the wrong side of 30. You don't have long-term team control over him. He's not a long-term franchise staple. He wasn't drafted by the Bulls. He hasn't been in Chicago for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? He probably is a fan favorite, I guess, but he's not a diehard fan favorite where everyone's going to be upset if you trade him. I think the fan base would be very understanding of a DeRozan trade. He's owed about $29 million this season, which means it's a very tradable contract. With where the money currently is in the NBA, it's not hard to get around $28 million kind of scooped up into a trade. That's really 2 mid-level-ish type contracts, and then maybe throw in a minimum, and you're kind of right in that ballpark. So Chicago definitely is going to be able to trade DeMar DeRozan if they choose. Again, remember, the whole question here is, will they choose to go that direction? Because Arturas Karnisovas, he's going to have to sell himself to not only the fan base, but the ownership, because he came in, he was very aggressive with a lot of his moves, and because of that, he's put himself in a position where if he has to walk back all of those decisions and say, hey, I was wrong about this, we got to pivot right now, there's a chance that ownership says, whoa, what's going on? You're the reason we made some of these moves. You're the reason we were so aggressive. So he's going to have to sell it to them, which is always kind of a struggle. But if he does sell it to them appropriately, he's probably going to be the one that oversees the rebuild, which is important for his own job security. So what could he start the rebuild with in a DeRozan trade? Well, first of all, it's probably a first-round pick and a smaller draft asset or salary filler. Maybe the smaller draft asset is a pick swap or a heavily protected first, or maybe a couple second-round picks. And then the salary filler is just to make the actual trade work. Here are the teams that I could see being interested in DeRozan. Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is tricky because they are prioritizing long-term cap space. That is very, very clear. I don't think the Sixers would be real players for DeRozan unless the price was super cheap for this year on a 1-year rental. Philadelphia could look at DeRozan as an expiring contract. Maybe you throw in some combination of Batum, Jaden Springer, and Marcus Morris, or something like that. The money probably works there. Maybe Jaden Springer's the young player that Chicago would want back, and then maybe, 2-3 second rounders. I just don't know if Chicago would accept something like that. That doesn't seem like enough based on my value estimate, which is why I don't think Philadelphia is going to be really willing to step into the batting cage, per se, on DeMar DeRozan. We'll talk about the 76ers a little bit later, though. The Los Angeles Lakers are a perfect DeRozan team. They have a bunch of different contracts you could slide in and out, whether that's D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura. They've got different contracts kind of around that, $12 to $18 million mark that you can substitute in, throw some type of package together, and they still do have one tradable first. They have a couple of second rounders they could still deal. The Lakers make sense. DeRozan from Southern California, he's talked at length multiple times about how much he's wanted to play for the Lakers. I think that they are in fact, best landing spot for him, but there are a couple other teams that I could see dabbling here with DeMar DeRozan. The Knicks are one of them, a team that always needs more half-court shot creation, especially in the playoffs. Julius Randle's been off to an abysmal start this season. He's had some okay moments, but for the most part, it's been a struggle for him. I'm not going to put all my stock into that. Randle has been a good regular season player 2 out of the last 3 years. Is it an every other year thing? Possibly. That's kind of the way it's trending this year. But it's possible, too, that, we're this early on in the season, he finds his footing. But DeRozan could definitely be a big addition for them. Again, they have some middling contracts. You think about something like Evan Fournier being thrown into a deal like this to kind of facilitate the money. He's not a long-term contract. The Knicks have a bunch of different types of draft picks, a bunch of different types of protected picks. You look at what they have from, say, Charlotte, Dallas. Some of those picks, would fit really well into a DeMar DeRozan trade package, which is why I think that they would be players here for DeRozan. I think it makes sense in terms of helping their team actually win games, especially come playoff time and around playoff time. But I also think that they have the assets to get it done. Orlando, and now that I say that, Arturas Karnisovas probably just got shivers down his spine because I'm sure he doesn't want to revisit trade talks with Orlando anytime soon. But Orlando actually does make a good deal of sense for DeRozan. I think the Magic are trending in the right direction. I think they have a lot of really good young talent. Right now they're playing Joe Ingles a ton of minutes. I can't see them continuing to do that. DeRozan would be a real significant upgrade, gives them some half-court scoring punch, something I still think that they need. Toronto, you get a fun kind of rewind to the beginning of DeRozan's career and some of his best years in the NBA when he was an All-NBA contributor for Toronto. Masai Ujiri kind of completes the cycle, brings him back in after having traded him away for Kawhi Leonard. Of course, that won the Raptors an NBA championship. No harm there at all. Toronto, obviously, with hindsight, makes that trade 10 out of 10 times. But the chance to get DeRozan back for relatively cheap, especially when they are trying to compete, they just traded for Jakob Poeltl last year. It does make some sense. It'd be funny, they brought back Poeltl already. Maybe they can bring back DeRozan as well. And then the last team to talk about for DeRozan for me is Miami. Another team similar to the Knicks, I feel like we always talk about in the playoffs. Could they use a little bit more scoring punch? I think the answer to that is yes. Their salary matcher would be Kyle Lowry, which is a little interesting because you think mostly DeRozan is a shooting guard or an off-ball guard. I think at times DeRozan's proven his ability to be a lead guard. I think in his time in San Antonio specifically, he significantly improved as a passer and was asked to do that more. And I'm going to be honest, Kyle Lowry's just not that good anymore. He makes plays, sometimes steps in, takes meaningful charges, right? I just do think DeRozan, Hero, Jimmy, Bam, and whoever your fifth guy is out there on the floor is a significantly better lineup than if you don't have DeRozan, if you have Kyle Lowry. The Heat have struck out on a bunch of trade targets this offseason, most prominently Damian Lillard. They also struck out on Drew Holiday. I think that the reality here is if they could get DeRozan, he would significantly help them. Then going on to trade asset number 2, this is the other big one, Zach LaVine. He's in the second year of a 5-year contract worth $215 million. He's owed over $40 million this year, as well as years 3, 4, and 5 of that contract. It is an ascending contract. He is quite expensive, and he's going to turn 29 years old this March, so right after the trade deadline. So a team trading for him, you have to think, okay, massive knee injury history, a player who, yes, he is very talented, very skilled, but a lot of his game has been predicated on athleticism. Of course, he was one of the best transition players in the league for quite some time. Zach LaVine is a polarizing player. Some people are very, very high on him. Some people are extremely low on him. I think there's a place in this league where LaVine could really help win. To me, though, it's probably going to have to be as a number 3 option, which that's a tough sell. To figure out what team is willing to spend that much money on a number 3 option. That's kind of the tricky part of, especially with the new CBA. So let's examine some places that I think do make some possible sense. There are a few teams interested here. Philadelphia, I said we were going to bring them back up. This is the time to do so. I think Philadelphia does make some sense, but probably not this actual season. I think that this would be more of an off-season thing if LaVine is still on the Bulls by the end of the year. The Lakers, again, I feel like almost like I'm ESPN talking about the Lakers so much. But the Lakers and LaVine just do make some sense as well. He played his college basketball at UCLA. I'm sure he would welcome a return to Los Angeles. And I think they would love to have him. His skill set fits on and off around LeBron. The Lakers are one of the few teams in the league that would be willing to spend $40 million a year for their number 3 option behind LeBron and Anthony Davis. And I think he's a much more natural fit next to those two than a guy like Russell Westbrook was, because LaVine is a very good shooter. Off the ball, on the ball, he can do that. And I think also his cutting game would probably reach new levels playing with LeBron. And I think he is somebody who, at times his attention to detail kind of wanes in and out. I think playing high leverage basketball for really the first time in his career would bode well for him kind of rewriting the narrative on him. Brooklyn Nets, they need more half-court shot creation as well. I didn't put DeRozan as a target for the Nets for a couple of reasons. One, he's old, at least older than LaVine, and then secondly, he probably doesn't fit the long-term timeline, especially on an expiring contract. LaVine, you don't have those issues. The Nets get LaVine in, he becomes an instant half-court shot creator for them. I think he would fit next to some of their defensive-minded guys like Mikal Bridges, Nick Claxton. Cam Johnson, I think, is a solid defensive player. Ben Simmons, of course. I think LaVine would be a really unique player there. But again, Cam Thomas has been so dynamite for Brooklyn that I'm not even sure if that's a necessity for them at this point. And I just don't even know if LaVine, like, again, it's hard to find real value for LaVine around the league. My value estimates is 2 first-round picks plus salary filler, or maybe 1 first-round pick and a good young player plus salary. That's really not a lot to choose from, I don't think, just given kind of where LaVine's at in his career. It's hard to see a team that's going to line up to give up a bunch of stuff. The Mavericks would be one of those teams, though. Now, they don't have a bunch to give up, but they have the 2027 first. Maybe if you're Chicago, you could swindle a pick swap out of them as well. And then it all comes down to kind of money. What players are they willing to part with in deals? And listen, I don't think the Mavericks make that much sense. But Nico Harrison doesn't care if it makes sense or not. He is going to try and get names. That's what he does. He doesn't really analyze basketball fit at all. He doesn't really know what he's doing. But he is definitely going to sniff around any player that becomes available, especially one of LaVine's caliber. So the Mavericks have to inherently make this list. The Pacers, a team that I think actually does make a good deal of sense. The style of basketball that they play fits very well with LaVine. They would not be reliant on LaVine to win games in the regular season. He would just simply bolster their roster. They have all of their draft picks. If they center something around this year's draft, they could easily afford to give up this year's first-round pick plus something else. And they do have a collection of intriguing young players that they could potentially intrigue Chicago with. If I'm Indiana, I'd be careful here. I don't know if I want to give up multiple, valuable things for LaVine. But if the deal is cheap enough and kind of at the right price point for a team like Indiana, who typically doesn't recruit a bunch of players in free agency, a guy of LaVine's caliber does make sense, especially with his transition ability, playing next to Tyrese Halliburton. I think that those two would actually be a really good pairing. Offensively, this doesn't solve some of Indiana's defensive questions, but Miles Turner, Jarris Walker, long-term, maybe that's just your solution that you already have internally. So as long as you're not giving up Jarris Walker in this deal, there's something that could theoretically work between these two organizations. And then New Orleans, I don't really love anything with New Orleans. I wanted to include a 6th team. I just don't know if I really see it. Going on to trade asset number 3, and that is Nikola Vucevic. And you notice I have trade asset number 3 in quotes. I don't really know if this is a true trade asset at this point. He's 33 years old. The best years of Nikola Vucevic are well behind us. Okay, he's in the first year of a 3-year, $60 million extension. I could not believe he got paid that much. Now, listen, credit to the Portland Trailblazers. They turned Yusuf Nurkic into something. I thought Nurkic's contract was bad. They ended up trading him somehow, some way. Phoenix bought in on it, whatever. I think Vucevic's contract is way worse. This is not a good contract. He has already not aged well. I expect him to continue aging worse and worse. He's going to be 35 years old the final year of the deal, and he'll be making over $21 million a year. I just don't know if that is a good contract in today's NBA. In fact, I know it's a bad contract in today's NBA. So you really need a stupid team to want to buy in on him. Who could that be? I don't really know. I don't think there's a lot of teams that would be actually interested. I only came up with 2 that I could even see remotely considering something for Vooch. And my value estimate is a bad contract back in return, plus multiple second-round picks, or maybe, just maybe, depending on what contract you're having to take back, maybe you get a first-rounder from a team that is expected to win 48 plus-ish games, something that is going to be, pick 24 or later in this year's draft. The 2 teams that I think would maybe sniff around something for Vucevic, the New York Knicks. The Knicks here, my reasoning is Mitchell Robinson, seemingly year in, year out, there's always something around him of, oh, well, he's not happy, or his agent's tweeting something out, or his trainer's tweet. There's always a little bit of drama. I don't think Vucevic is actually an upgrade for New York. I don't think he's the type of center that they need. But this would kind of hinge on a Mitchell Robinson not really being happy, the Knicks kind of being done and tired with that. To be honest, I'd rather see the Knicks just turn over the starting center job to Hartenstein in that case and completely forget this whole Vucevic thing. But people are going to get mad at me, especially Bulls fans. They're going to say, oh my gosh, do you think listen, it's just, sometimes it's not even just about how the player is, but in the world of the NBA, when you have to worry about salary cap and the CBA and how you're going to fit everyone into this little tiny threshold of money that you have to pay everyone, having a guy like Vucevic, who's probably overpaid by $8 million at this point, makes things really tough. That's the difference between getting a good mid-level exception player and not, depending on your ownership. Now, the Knicks probably willing to pay, but why would it be on Vucevic? And then for the Grizzlies, this is like a really weird bandage for the fact that they've started out the year terribly. They have like no offensive rebounding. Their defensive rebounding is not great. They're really missing Steven Adams. Of course, no Ja Morant either right now. I don't think Vuce is a great fit into that team, but he would be, again, like I said, a Band-Aid. He gives them rebounding, he gives them size, things that they're currently lacking right now with both Brandon Clark and Steven Adams out. It's been, really tough for the Grizzlies to get going this year. Could I see them doing something around Vucevic? I mean, I don't like it. I don't really see it, but you never really want to say never, right? So those are the two teams I came up. I don't like anything for Vucevic, to be honest. As you guys can tell, I'm very, very low on Nikola Vucevic. I think, listen, he's had a great career. He's made a ton of money for himself. I'm very happy for him. But in the year 2023, I'm not trading anything to go get Nikola Vucevic. And I think the Bulls are a prime example why you don't want to do that. Then going into trade asset number 4, and this is really the one that excites me in the list, Alex Caruso, and his contract is very, very pleasant. He makes less than $9.5 million this year, and he's only guaranteed $3 million next year. So if a team wanted to cut him, there's very little money left on the books from doing so at the end of this season, but there's not really a reason to cut him. He makes under $10 million next year as well. It is an ascending contract, but with how cheap it is, I mean, it's significantly below today's mid-level exception. That's how much the mid-level exception has jumped in the last couple of years. Caruso's number is about $3 million below the mid-level exception, or what it will be next year. It might even be a little bit higher, might be around $13-ish million. So Alex Caruso is a bargain of a player right now. He is 29 years old. He will turn 30 in February. I think he's one of those false age guys, kind of like Terrence Mann, where everyone thinks the guy's way younger than he actually is. Caruso came into the league, quite older than most NBA draft prospects, given his NBA draft circumstances, right? Same thing kind of with Terrence Mann a little bit. But I think Caruso is a player that he could seamlessly fit into any single roster because he's selfless. He cuts, he passes, he drives, and he defends. And those types of things are real glue guy mentality type of pieces that every NBA team could use and use more of. I think about the Derek White trade to the Boston Celtics and how transformational that's been for them. Alex Caruso is not Derek White, but he's like the Walmart version of Derek White, or he's like when your mom says you have food at home version. He's not as good, he's not as sexy, but he still gets the job done relatively well, and he's very, very cheap. And that's kind of the entire point here, is Alex Caruso could help a bunch of teams. So when you're considering who might go after him, there's a bunch of suitors that make a lot of sense. The value estimate for me is a first-round pick plus a young player. So you can see I'm actually pretty high on what his value is. I think this is one of Chicago's best trade assets because it's really easy to fit his contract anywhere in the league. You can take any contract relatively back for it. You're going to be able to get a bunch of teams interested in a guy like him, especially since some of these teams are going to be competing against each other for his services. They're going to really want not only to get him, but to make sure the team that they're facing potentially in the playoffs doesn't get him. And he's a player, like I said, who's going to be a seamless fit. The first team to bring up here, the Lakers. Again, I sound like ESPN with so much LA talk, but the Lakers are constantly a team in trade discussions. Rob Pelinka has made a ton of trades in his tenure as GM for the Lakers, and I think that bringing Caruso back to Los Angeles actually does make a ton of sense for them. The Gabe Vincent thing hasn't gone great to start off the year. Now, I'm not saying sell all your Gabe Vincent stock, but I'm just saying if this trend continues, could a Vincent Caruso swap make some sense with a little bit of draft capital or something else in there? Makes sense, and I think the answer to that is yes. Now, for the Miami Heat, listen, I think this is another one that they really have to explore. They lost Max Strus. They lost Gabe Vincent themselves. I think that, listen, they've got some bodies. Drew Smith is an intriguing guard, but they haven't had a great start either. They're currently 11th in the Eastern Conference when I'm recording this. Caruso would definitely be a good addition for them, especially with the way they like to defend. I think someone who's really smart and active defensively like Caruso is would be not only a great addition into their man-to-man defense, but I think he would seamlessly fit into their zone defense, which they run more than any team in the league. I think he would be a really great addition. Now, the question is, does he bring enough half-court punch? Probably not, but maybe the Heat can find a way to get DeRozan and Caruso, or LaVine and Caruso. Not that I see LaVine really being something the Heat go after, but we talked about DeRozan earlier for Miami. Maybe a DeRozan plus Caruso package makes some sense. There'd be a lot of things involved with that, but maybe Nikola Vucevic is a key piece going back to Chicago. Who knows, right? The Heat have some intriguing young pieces. It just kind of comes down to how much you're willing to part with for a guy like Caruso, who I think is really valuable and gives your team more championship equity this season. The Celtics and Bucks, these are two teams that are going to be really competing against each other for players down the stretch of this season. The Celtics are, in my opinion, the title favorites right now. They are, I believe, the best team in the league. They are extremely talented in their first 6-7 guys in the rotation, and Caruso would really help cement the 8th guy role, something that they did lose with Grant Williams. Now, their team does look quite a bit different this year as well. You think about Derek White and Drew Holiday kind of being your two guards. Why do you need Caruso? Well, first of all, if one of them misses time right now, the Celtics are missing Derek White for personal reasons. Caruso would be a huge addition for them. I think Peyton Pritchard, he has a spot in this league, but I don't think it's as a 7th man, a main contributor. I think he's more of a 9th, 10th guy, where in spot minutes he can do some really nice things for you, but you can't rely on him on a night-to-night basis. I think Caruso would be a massive upgrade. We already know Boston can score the basketball. I think Caruso's kind of flexibility and kind of creativeness as a cutter, slasher and facilitator out of those roles would be a really nice addition next to Boston's big men, their front court, specifically with the floor spacing that they get with Horford and Porzingis. Obviously, Tatum and Brown are so dynamic as wings. Caruso could easily slide right in there. And then for Milwaukee, I think one of their biggest needs right now is guard play, especially defensive-minded guard play. They traded away Grayson Allen. They lost Javon Carter in free agency to Chicago. So could Chicago kind of going in and stealing Javon Carter open up a trade where Caruso now goes to Milwaukee? I definitely think so now. Milwaukee is kind of strapped in terms of what they have to offer. It's going to be hard to see them being able to really scrape together a good package, but they do have some young players I like. I think Chris Livingston's a good young player. Marjon Beauchamp would be an interesting piece. I'm not sure if Milwaukee's going to be willing to throw Beauchamp into a deal for Caruso. I'm sure Livingston would be available, but I think if I'm Chicago, I'm at least seeing what some of these teams are willing to throw in there, what types of swaps, picks I could get, whatever really is available. Minnesota, one of the best feel-good stories to start the season. They're 4-2 currently through 6 games, and they've been the best defensive team in the league, and it's not even really close. Rudy Gobert is playing at, I would say, even the highest level of his career, and he is a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. That's how good Gobert has looked to start the year. Jaden McDaniels, he's had kind of a foul issue to start the season. He's still been really, really good defensively. Anthony Edwards at times looks like one of the best players in the league. At other times, it looks like the guy can't tell left from right because of his decision making. But if you get Ant on a good night, he can compete with any superstar in the league, I would argue. I think the Wolves, if you get Caruso, listen, one of the big questions for them is, what's the depth look like on that team? Shake Milton just hasn't played great to start the season. Troy Brown Jr., who a lot of people were excited about, he basically doesn't have a role on the Wolves like 3, 4, 5 games into the year. He was basically cut out of the rotation that early on. The Wolves are thin, and I think right now they're healthy. That's been a huge plus for them, as they've been able to keep most of their key guys on the floor. McDaniels, of course, missed the start of the season, but since then he's been healthy. Getting Caruso in the door would not only be a good upgrade for their bench and their depth, but it actually makes sense for them. They are a defensive-minded team. Caruso has really quick feet, quick hands, good decision maker, smart, and a good team defender and individual defender. You substitute him in for Shake Milton or for whatever other player you want to point to for Minnesota, it's a home run. And he's cheap. That's the really important thing here. Minnesota's got some long-term issues in terms of spending. Who are they going to be able to afford? Getting Caruso is relatively cheap in terms of his actual spot in your cap table, which is why Minnesota does make a lot of sense. And then the Denver Nuggets, listen, the Nuggets were not the title winners because of Bruce Brown, but Bruce Brown did help. And I think that they are missing him a little bit this year. Now, they've had a fantastic start. Christian Braun's a really good young player. Peyton Watson has a lot of awesome flashes, and when he plays well there, he plays really, really well. But some games he doesn't play well. And Christian Braun is still relatively young. And I think getting an experienced guy like Caruso, who's played playoff minutes before and has been around important high-impact leverage moments, I think would be an instant fit. I think his cutting with Jokic would be incredible. I think really the Nuggets are the best fit out of all the teams on this list because they can utilize non-shooters better than pretty much anybody because of Jokic's passing. But I do think, Boston does a great job of that as well. So all of these teams make some significant sense for Caruso, and you can see probably pretty quickly on why all these teams would bid for him and why his value estimate is so close to that of DeRozan or even kind of relatively close to LaVine because he's extremely cheap in terms of his actual salary, and a lot of other teams are going to have interest in him, which means the bidding for him goes up significantly. The organizational direction is really the most important thing. Arturas Karnisovas basically needs to admit he was wrong. They need to pivot to losing now because they're already doing that anyway. I'm not a big fan of, tank the season, tank the entire roster, trade everybody typically, because I think it's really hard to completely rebuild a roster and completely retool. Listen, I'm not even suggesting that. I'm not saying trade Kobe White. I'm not saying trade every single little piece you have. I'm not saying trade Javon Carter. Listen, you just got to transition. This team is not working. Next year, Lonzo will be an expiring contract. Maybe you could, scrape together some stuff and use him in a deal to take in some other picks and take in a bad contract or something, right? There's ways to work some stuff out here if you're Chicago. The real truth here, though, is you can't stay with what you have because you're not good enough now, and you definitely won't be good enough later. It's just real bad GM malpractice, in my opinion, if they just let this roster roll throughout the year. I would be shocked if they do. But then again, I was shocked when they extended Vucevic. So they own their picks, like I said. The 2025 Spurs own their first that year, but it's top 10 protected with top 8 backup protections into 26 and 27. Listen, if they tank this year, they could draft this year. And I know people are going to say, it's a weak draft. First of all, no, it's not really a weak draft. There's a lot of good players in this draft. A guy like Alex Sarr or Ron Holland or Matas Buzelis could completely reshape the way this Bulls team looks right now. It could completely change the future outlook of the team by having at least one core young player in your roster that you feel like you can trust on a night-to-night basis. The whole point, though, is if you tank this year, you're probably not going to be very good next year either, which means you'll be drafting next year, and that gives you a shot at a guy like Cooper Flagg, who could be an absolute transformational player into your roster. There's a lot of really good, young, talented players coming into the league in the next couple of years. The drafts are crazy. You got the Boozer twins. You've got AJ Dybantsa. There's a lot of good players. You just have to wait and be patient. And you can't be mediocre. That's just not good enough, especially when you're an aging roster. You need to set yourself up for real success down the road, and I think the Bulls have the opportunity to do that as long as they kind of have a fire sale this year. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Again, check out some of those other videos on the channel. You're seeing them on the screen now. My suggested video, the previous video on the channel. There's a lot of great stuff to watch. Make sure you guys check it out, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.